Um, okay, well, now we have Christina Cogdell, who's the chair and professor of design at the University of California at Davis. She's the author of the book Eugenic Design, Streamlining America in the 1930s, as well as a new book, Toward a Living Architecture, Complexism and Biology in Generative Design. So thanks so much, Christina, for joining.
My pleasure.
So excited to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be asked first by Dan to think about writing for Biodesign, but also just to get to chat with you and be present and participate in the upcoming challenge. I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. And Biodesign we're really excited about as well, and we're really looking forward to your article in the upcoming issue, which is themed spaces. So we're talking a lot about different kinds of architecture and sort of how humans engage with it. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I'm really curious about is, what do architects mean, and what do you mean in the title of your new book by the phrase living architecture?
All right. Well, it kind of depends on who is using the phrase and who's in the conversation about what living architecture is. In my recent book, there's a number of examples that are given of different approaches to thinking about what living architecture might be. And I don't talk so much about biomimicry in my book, but I know sometimes people think that if buildings have some properties like the ability to move, or if they look organic in certain ways, that they therefore think it's organic architecture or living architecture. To me, that's not a criteria. It's not the way I think about living architecture. So one of the things about biomimicry is that it can be high tech often, and the solutions that are implemented to make something human and technological look like something, or function in a way like something natural to solve a problem, it can still be an ingenious solution, but it's not necessarily, in my mind, living or necessarily even sustainable. There's another branch that I talk about called protocell architecture that Rachel Armstrong and some of her collaborators are promoting. And the phrase that they use often is living technology. And they work with different kinds of chemistries, and they're trying to work with kind of protocell researchers in science who are attempting to create the first cell from scratch, the first life from scratch.
Wow.
And so some of the properties of the vesicles that they've been able to make, these can respond to light, they move, they can divide, they cluster, they take things in and they put things out. And those are all properties that living cells have, but these are not yet living cells. So one of the ways that they refer to what's happening in protocells is metabolism. And that to me is a word that's really should be reserved for living cells. That's what life does, has the metabolism. So there's that branch. Then there's like people who work in artificial intelligence or artificial life, where computers are doing things that look lifelike. To me, there's an aspect of life cycle and real chemical functioning in biology that is something that I find crucial to my definition of what I think of as living architecture. Yeah. So when I think about biodesign, and that's a phrase I would use in connection with living architecture, I think designing with biological materials, like wood, so we've done that for a really long time, or with living organisms, bacteria, fungi, things that we're learning to collaborate with, in order to make designs that are closer towards circularity. For me, the life cycle is crucial. It's about minimal processing, minimal energy, little processing of materials, so that the life cycle is such that it feeds back into a natural life cycle more easily without causing climate change to the extent that we're doing.
Got it. Yeah. So it's a lot about the sustainability of the work also comes into play a lot.
I mean, for me, it does. That to me is one of my major motivations. I've always been fascinated with biology. I've loved plants. I write a little bit about gardening in my article. So there's always been that love in my life. But given the environmental situation and my critique as a design historian, I'm very concerned about climate change and the role that design and architecture play in that process.
So you've also talked about the ways that living spaces, in addition to being reflective of the sustainability situation that we're just talking about, you've also written about the way living spaces reflect sort of cultural and societal attitudes of the moment as well, in history.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment, right, currently we're in a unique historical
Yeah.
point. And so do you see the spaces we design that are going to be designed in the coming months and years or are underway, are they going to be reflecting like this point in our society?
I think they have to. So, one, I think they would anyways, but I think that we need to be very proactive about addressing the crises that we've been facing. So many have come our way so fast, from weather, extreme
Mhm.
weather issues, fires, to the pandemic, to now the justice protests running across the world. Kind of the biggest civil rights actions we've seen since the 60s and 70s. So it's crucial to me that design listens and is active in promoting and reflecting what's happening in society. So, an example of what I'm thinking about, there's within biodesign, there's part of what is put forward is speculative design. And there's speculation on the near future with things that are possible. There's speculation on the far future. And those things can still reflect, as you're saying, our cultural moment and our cultural assumptions. I mean, that's one thing my work is focused on, is how do ideologies or things we internalize and just take as true get reflected then in what we
Sure.
make. But I really think that things that are more tangible and immediate in the transformations that they can begin to enact are really important right now. I think about the lab for living that's at Hallam Sheffield University in the UK. My friend Peter Lloyd Jones, who I write about in my book, he's a molecular biologist who's working in design now. He's working on a number of projects there, one of which was the Design for Health conference
Yeah.
that unfortunately was just canceled owing to COVID
Right.
in Amsterdam. The same group there is working on a project called the 100-Year Life, like the fact that we're living longer. How do we design to be intentional about one person living for 100 years? How can things last through multiple phases of a person's life? They're also now starting a project on design for pandemics and thinking about space. And all of these things are crucial. I think especially though too, thinking now about kind of the anti-racism that's being put forward and discussed culturally at large, but also we need to embrace that within design, within industry, and within academia.
So how are some of the ways that like design and architecture can sort of bridge the ideological spectrum and bring people together instead of, as opposed to like in history, perhaps difference in ideologies resulted in differences in design and the ability to live in spaces sort of cohesively. Is there a way that we can sort of come back together through using architecture as well?
I believe there is, and I believe there needs to be. So we need to work towards that end, even if we don't know exactly what that looks like at this very moment.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, design embodies and has embodied in the past deep assumptions about race, progress, evolution. Sometimes it's explicit. Most often, though, I think it's implicit in the way people think, and they're just the outcomes of what they're thinking is good design. So I really think that we need a deep critical consciousness. We need to let people of color restructure our field. We need to empower designers of color. We need to hire them. So one of the things in thinking about this issue, when I teach the history of American architecture and I get to postmodernism, I talk about the 60s. I talk about the social unrest, and I talk about the ways in which postmodern architects, who were mostly white, male, Western architects, as get included in the canon, so to speak, that they talked about diversity and a global architecture, but the field itself didn't really change. So it was still 2% female and 1% black. I mean, those are not the actual stats. I don't have them in front of me, but but what I think is there needs to be absolutely fundamental structural change. So what I get students thinking about historically is like, wow, these things were actually activism for real social, political, economic change. And we gave lip service, or some designers did, in terms of style, but that's superficial. Like, it really has to go to a fundamental revamping of who is in our field and who are the voices that are shaping what our world becomes.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree. That's the case for literally every field, right? We need a full rethink of the way that our society works and the way that our culture and norms are written. And, architecture is one piece of that, but the way that we live and the spaces that we live in is that's our days, that's our lives, and especially seeing how important that is in the backdrop of the pandemic, it makes it all the more clear that that's true.
Yep.
So what are some of the big exciting pieces that you think are coming up? You're writing for Biodesigned magazine, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're writing about some of the experiences that you've had, including building Adobe houses, and you're talking about they're not really considered biodesign because they're too low tech, but like I mean, like there are so many other like existing and traditional aspects of building with biology that we might be missing out on by being too focused on the future. So I mean, are there other exciting projects that you think of that maybe fall into that we're like missing out on because of this like obsession with the future?
Yeah, and I definitely think like if you think about biodesign teams and the competition, and even a number of biodesign projects that have been featured in recent exhibitions like Broken Nature or Nature Collaboration with Designers, the Cooper Hewitt. There are folks who are working with what I might think of as materials like Adobe, things that are pretty simple. They're not really heavily processed. Yeah. So I think about kelp, algae, biochar. Some things are living still. Some things are living and are just killed to be worked with as like a structure or a surface for a design. Mycelium, we grow it, but then we kind of halt its process so that we have a stable form of it. These are things that excite me. Just like, I mean, it's interesting. Dan asked me to be personal in this essay, and I was like, I don't write personal. I write academic essays. He's like,
Biodesigned, right?
He's like, go for it. So I just started reflecting on my life, and I realized actually, I like Adobe, and I have worked. I lived in New Mexico for 5 years. I worked on building a house myself and other friends. And the experience of mixing Adobe, using straw, it's, that's the living part of it. It's a bio-based material, but otherwise it's just dirt and water. Yeah. And a little sand. But the beauty of it is it just goes back to dirt. Like it's about the life cycle for me. It's sunlight that dries it out. It's incredible. And it's accessible to people. It's almost a free resource if you have a piece of land that has the right kind of dirt. So, it's a climate specific thing. And I think when we're thinking about other kinds of materials, when you say like, what are we missing out on? Different climates offer different opportunities, different geographies and different plants and soils and such. So I think paying attention to site and then working in creative ways that are low energy, low processing, we can come up with some amazing things. So, I think about mycelium is one of the most obvious ones that a lot of people are working on for architecture because it's easily scalable. It's a great insulator. It's fireproof. I'm interested in straw bale houses. That's something that gets built in a number of places, which are fantastic as well. It's making use of a waste rice straw, and you can build an incredible house out of it. So some of those things are better for low scale structures like residences 1 to 2 stories, but other things like turning to kind of higher tech processing of wood to create higher rise structures made out of wood. Wood's coming back in vogue because its life cycle is more sustainable than steel and glass. Right. So, yeah, I'm also excited about biocementation. I've been working with a grad student who's collaborating with scientists at UC Davis, and I just saw a story about CU Boulder. There's a number of people making progress with using bacteria to biocement soil or sand or even waste materials of a different sort. So there's just a lot of things that are on the horizons that really get me excited.
Well, it definitely sounds like an exciting future for biodesign, and certainly for looking at the ways that we use our materials that are just there, that are part of our life cycle and the life cycles of the world and the spaces that we live in, and sort of pulling that in more organically to our own lives. I think there's a huge opportunity, as you say, and a lot of exciting things on the horizon. So
yeah, and I'll also say that when I say high tech versus low tech, like I think 3D printers are here. I think computers are here, until we run out of materials to make them, which is part of, a side point in my book. But I just think that to me, it's the energy that goes into processing things that is super important to consider. And since we already have many computers, how can we use 3D printers on the scale of a home, like Icon Build, based in Austin, Texas. They're starting to 3D print houses. They're using a certain kind of concrete, but why couldn't they print with, a different kind of bio-based material? Things like that. I mean, I see ways to collaborate with the technologies we have, but to still transform the materials that we choose. So it's not a high tech, low tech thing. It's a thinking very smartly about what we have at our disposal, so that we can try to design really smart. So.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Christina.
My pleasure.
I really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope that everyone watching has gotten a lot out of this conversation as much as I have. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex. Take care.